Welcome everyone to our webinar, an introduction to the Itential Network Automation Platform. We still have a few more people joining, so we'll give them just another minute or two and we'll get started. All right, it looks like we're ready to go. Let's get started. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Itential's Introduction to Itential's Network Automation Platform. As a quick introduction, my name is Rich Martin. I'm the Senior Technical Marketing Engineer at Itential. And today's webinar is focused on showcasing how Itential's key capabilities can help organizations to get started quickly with network automation. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping points. One, everyone on the call will be muted. Two, we're going to reserve answering any questions until the end of the presentation, but please ask your question along the way by typing them into the questions panel, which you can find at the bottom of your control panel. And three, if we don't get to all the questions on this call, we will answer them via email shortly after the webinar. So let's get started. Itential is intelligent automation for network and cloud, and we use a low-code solution for end-to-end network configuration, compliance, and automation. And so some of the key tenets that we want to make sure we get across to our audience about the platform. And again, this is an overview, and we're going to be covering a lot of information, but we want to reiterate some really key components, especially around end-to-end network automation. Number one, robust network configuration and compliance is a core part of what we do. And this is across your entire network, not just your traditional CLI-based network infrastructure, but actually around both the traditional networking and as we start to see more and more cloud networking or modern networking that's maybe API-driven and not CLI-driven. It's important to understand that driving compliance across the entire network is important, and that's what Itential is built to do with the integrations that we have. And so that really lays the groundwork for being able to accelerate your automation strategy. Along with that idea is being able to integrate with everything. And we do really mean that. We have 100 plus and growing out of the box integrations to IT systems, network controllers of all types, because every enterprise ecosystem is going to be completely different and completely unique. And so those decisions are made case by case, team by team, group by group, based off of the information that's important to them. So being able to integrate with all those different systems and controllers and such is important. So ITSM systems like ServiceNow or Jira, DevOps systems, inventory and sources of truth, being able to support all of that by both providing pre-built integrations, which we call adapters, or allowing our customers to build their own integrations with these systems in a very simple and uncomplicated way. Rapid automation for networking cloud infrastructure. Like I said before, traditional network infrastructure, those are great tools, but now we're moving into a world where network infrastructure and network responsibilities is now reaching into the cloud in faster ways than ever. And we have to be able to build automations that work across both of them in this new kind of modern networking infrastructure. And so being able to do that and empowering network engineers with low code, drag and drop interfaces so that they can build across all of that infrastructure they're responsible for, that's critical. So that's one of the key components that we'll show you today. And ultimately, if you look at the end state, if we can create a compliant network where we have a lot of confidence to deploy and really accelerate the deployment of network automations across the entire infrastructure, ultimately, we want to be able to deliver that as a self-service methodology to groups within the networking team, outside of the networking team. And ultimately, this benefits you in the greatest amount of automation is because now we can take these confident, your network, which now is compliant, build very confident automations across that, and then self-service and publish those to different groups so that they can participate in automation across the entire organization. And so if we step back and take a look kind of at a 20,000, 30,000 foot view of the Itential architecture, I talked a little bit about self-serve, and that's a key component. So at the very top, you see the ability to, whatever work you do and whatever applications you're working with in the platform, ultimately, those things can be available through an API and a self-service methodology. One of the things we're going to look at, one of the components of our platform, is the Itential Configuration Manager. This is tied to building network infrastructure that's compliant to a particular configuration standard, both CLI, traditional CLI-based network infrastructure, and API-based infrastructure. And this is important because building that, again, creates the ability to go into automation and really start to accelerate that. So along with that, we'll take a look at Automation Studio, which allows us to build automations, or allows our network practitioners to build automation in a low-code drag and drop methodology and get started very, very quickly. Some other key components to our platform is data transformation. If we look at the bottom, we can do of this box, we can see on the southbound the ability to integrate via APIs to different networking systems. And one of the things we will talk about is Automation Gateway and what that's about, but being able to onboard networking controllers and different networking systems that may have responsibility over a particular networking domain. But also all those IT systems, those ITSMs, IPAMs, other sources of truths, databases, whatever is in that ecosystem of IT systems, being able to use APIs to integrate with those as well. And if you think about that, when we bring those integrations into the platform, we have to do quite a bit of data transformation in order to manipulate the output of, say, one API call from one system and turn it into a API call into another system. And so we do these data transformations using foundationally a JSON schema and JSON objects as kind of the methodology in the platform, which makes it very easy for anyone to understand. And then we build really, really great tools around the ability to transform data from one format to another very quickly without writing any code for data manipulation or string manipulation or things like that. So that's a key component. And then data federation. You will have in your environment multiple sources of truth. They could be IPAM systems, network controllers, databases, so on and so forth. It's important for a platform to integrate with those so that we can access the information that you need at the time of automation. So having the most up-to-date information is important. And then understanding things like, if we federate data from different sources, then we can use all those sources as sources of truth and use that information as an automation is starting to do its work. Also, from an inventory perspective, we can federate inventory of network devices through controllers like NSO or through other methodologies, and understand where those devices are on the network and through which components we need to use to reach to connect to those devices. So all of those pieces are critical, and we'll be hitting upon all of this in the platform, specifically Configuration Manager, Automation Studio, and Automation Gateway. And so when we look at this slide here, these are the three critical components. We're going to start our tour with Configuration Manager. This is focused on network and cloud configuration and compliance management. And again, network, traditional network and cloud, things that are CLI driven and API driven. The next stop we'll make on our tour is Automation Gateway. And this is where we've seen many enterprises start to work and build some automations in the form of scripts. Sometimes it's Python scripts. Sometimes it's Ansible playbooks, things like that. This is a great application that allows teams to now organize, test, and publish all of these CLI-based automations, and then they can be reused within the platform itself. So we'll take a look at some of the core features there. And then we'll finish off our tour and overview with Automation Studio. This is where networking teams and others in the IT group can build, design, run all kinds of different automations very, very quickly, very rapidly in an end-to-end methodology. So integrating with lots of different systems as part of an overall process, and doing it in a methodology that does not require a big programming background, drag and drop, canvas, being able to quickly build automations, and then how we can accelerate that movement through the use of our pre-built libraries. And with that, I'm going to transition over to the demo, and give me a moment here to share the screen. Okay, so where we're going to start first with is Configuration Manager. So where we're at now is the main home screen of the Itential Automation Platform when you first log in. And the first stop we'll go just into the Configuration Manager application. And again, this is focused on enabling you to maintain network compliance across the entire network, which is going to help your organization accelerate their automation strategy. So the first thing is we need inventory. If we're going to build a compliance standard, we need inventory. We need devices from which to compare to. And so what you're looking at on the left-hand side under devices is that inventory. And again, what I mentioned earlier is that this inventory is federated from different sources. Some of it comes from different installations of NSO. Some of it can come from different installations of our automation gateway that we have deployed in our lab. And you'll also notice that we can actually inventory cloud-based services, network services like VPCs. So all of that is available through our federation, through our ability to federate. And so if we look at, we'll take a look at this. We're gonna do some work on this device later, but because we're communicating with these devices real time through different controllers or systems, this is being accessed through a automation gateway. I get a real-time status that's online, and then I can pull up the configuration and take a look at what the latest configuration is. And of course, we can do things like backups, comparisons, all pretty typical of how a compliance application works. So if we have our inventory, our next step there is building that golden configuration or that compliance standard by which we can now compare these devices to. So we have our inventory of devices. How do we do the configurations and build those standards? Well, let's take a look at what a typical global data center configuration tree looks like. And we take a hierarchical approach to this and really allow the user to build out using a methodology of kind of segmenting different configurations in a tree structure. So if I start with the base configuration and take a look at it, you'll see a couple of things here, and I'll explain some of the details. But essentially, it looks like a copy and paste of a very short subsection of an iOS configuration, and that's what it is. But if we go to the next tree down, so this green part of the tree here, and we look at the configuration, you'll notice we're adding in quite a bit more. So we're inheriting from the base, which is in blue, and we're adding to it the green, which is Europe, and bringing in even more configuration. And now you can see this kind of flesh out into more of a standard configuration. And so if I click on this line 49, I'll show you a couple of things here. When we highlight a line, we can assign specific rules to it. So in this case, there's a red line through it, which means it's disallowed, meaning as part of the configuration standard, this line is not allowed to appear in any running configuration of a device that's being compared to this part of the tree. But we can also go and ignore it. and another rule is to make it required. So using those three components, we can start to build rules based off of the configuration needs for the devices that will be compared to this. In this case, we will keep it to disallow. And then for each one of these configuration lines, we can assign a severity, info, warning, or error. These allow you to flag particular out of compliance lines and then assign a score to them that is part of the running the compliance report and looking at the totality of all the things that are in or out of compliance. And so if we now dive a little bit deeper, you can kind of see how that inheritance model works. If I go down to the east, and I won't save these changes, and look at the configuration, it not only does it inherit from base in Europe, but also from London. And of course, this purple color here is the East. And so a couple of things I'll point out here. You'll notice now that some of this configuration is not static. It's variabilized. And so like in line 40, we're actually allowing users to use regular expression matches as part of, let's say, an access list, but it can be in any part of the configuration lines. Also to create variables. So for instance, in lines 43 and a few more after that, we're defining variables like SNMP server names, SNMP hosts. This is nice because now you can kind of create a dynamic and variabilized configuration or portions of your configuration tree and make changes. So if changes need to be made wholesale, you're not going into dozens of files making the changes. You're changing the variable which gets replaced in these configuration files. And then finally, if you look down here, kind of going a step further, is the ability to embed Jinja templates. So now we can reduce the sizes and complexity of very, very long configuration files by creating a looping template that allows us, in this case, to use loopback interfaces here that are defined as variables, or it could be something like access control lists. So if I go back to Europe in a more simple case, each one of these configuration branches, I can now start to associate different devices to it. So those devices from the inventory, I can add devices and remove devices. And now their compliance standard by which they're compared to in a report is based off of where they are associated in the configuration tree. So in this case, I could run a configuration compliance, and this is a Cisco iOS device. I can start a configuration compliance, and it's going to obviously go pull the configuration, compare it to that configuration that's based off of the base and the Europe trees, and then give us an output on the results based off of those rules that we set. And if I view the compliance, we can see that it is passed and it's in compliance. If you look at its neighbor here, Core ATL2, the last time it was run, which was today, it was out of compliance. So if I just look at the compliance report for this, it actually passes because of the overall grade or score of what was out of compliance. But I am very interested in what was compliant, non-compliant, and it looks like an access list that was required was not found. So I can actually do a remediation inside of the application just by clicking add, and then if I were to apply this to the configuration, it would go and remediate and update that configuration so that it would be compliant again. And so this is how the traditional model of compliance is done, and this is how we've really made it more efficient and more and simpler and easier for network practitioners to go in and start building these configuration trees, and in a really single place to make changes as needed and update these and keep them updated, and then applying devices as needed to every part of the tree or creating new areas of the tree that are necessary. But what's really interesting is within this application configuration manager is the ability for us to do compliance checking across devices or network services that are not CLI driven. So how is that done? Well, it's done through an API methodology. So here we've built a configuration tree for Meraki SSID compliance. So in this case, if you're familiar with Meraki, the whole point is there's really not a CLI for you to play around in. It's really dashboard driven, but behind the dash is APIs. And that's what we're doing. So if we look at what a configuration looks like a JSON object that is a response to an API call into the Meraki controller asking about how the SSIDs are configured. And so this becomes our standard. So in a way, it's very similar to how we look at CLI-based configuration and compliance rules, but now we're parsing against an API response. And so instead of devices, we're actually defining the SSIDs that are already configured on the Meraki, and we're asking the Meraki about the information of how these SSIDs are configured through this task name. And this task name is actually an API call through the Meraki controller called get network SSID. And it describes how a particular SSID, in this case, SSID 6, is configured. And from that response, we compare it to that configuration that I just showed you to determine if it's inside or outside of compliance. And this is an API call. It runs very fast, so it's not parsing a lot of CLI. It's immediately finished, and I'll do a quick update here. We'll see, yep, it just ran, and it's in compliance. So right now, there's nothing wrong with this. But one of the, of course, interesting things about anything that's kind of cloud-driven nowadays is they make automation very simple, and especially making changes. So if I actually go into the Meraki controller and take a look at my SSIDs, so remember we were looking at SSID 6, I can actually make changes very quickly. So if I go here to edit settings, I can bring this out of compliance manually. And imagine I'm maybe not even on the networking team. Maybe I'm on some other team that has access to this cloud-based dashboard, and I can make changes. And I change, 2 specific things. I save that. And it was very easy for me to make those changes, but the Meraki dashboard really has no concept of what is in or out of compliance. So it didn't warn me of any changes. It just allowed me to make the changes in a very quick way. So now if I go back to here and take a look at run a compliance report, we'll do a refresh here. We'll see that we had a change, and now we're given a warning that we're not in compliance anymore. And if I look at the compliance report itself, you'll notice the 2 things that I modified, splash page and band selection, are the items that are out of compliance. Now, I showed earlier how we could do a remediation inside the application. Let me now show you how we can integrate with our automated, our ability to build automations to do an automation that does this remediation automatically. Again, building compliance into your network so that it accelerates your ability to do automation. And so if I go back into the main automation platform here and go to automation catalog. So this section of the platform is where we would publish an automation once it's been created and tested, in this case, and so that people can run it. And so in this case, we have an SSID compliance and remediation check automation. And so if I run this manually, it's going to kick off a job that's going to now integrate back into Configuration Manager and iterate over all those SSIDs, find those SSID definitions that are out of compliance by querying the Meraki controller, and then automatically putting them back into compliance again. So as you can see, this is already done. This job, the job manager shows us step by step. This has already completed the entire automation. And so if I go back now to Configuration Manager, where this used to be out of compliance, and I run a compliance report on it again, we can see now it is in compliance because of the automation that we just ran. And if I view the compliance, we can see that it's passed, no issues found. And then we also get a history over time of when things were and were out of compliance. So that is a brief overview of Configuration Manager and how it allows you to build compliance across your entire network infrastructure, CLI, API, traditional cloud, whatever it may be, and doing it in a way that network practitioners, network engineers can really understand and start to use immediately. So the next portion of our tour, let's take a look at Automation Gateway. So I spoke earlier about Automation Gateway. This enables network teams to organize, test, run, publish scripts. You may have folks on your team that have started building out things like Ansible playbooks or found really good scripts out there. And so we want to bring all of those automation assets, which are typically run on a command line interface, into this application so that the network team can see what's available. And we do some very interesting integration. So if we start with Ansible, you'll notice that we have support for Ansible collections and devices. So this creates an inventory that Ansible, so if you have an existing Ansible installation, we can integrate with it. And now whatever inventory is available now is onboarded into Automation Gateway. And since Automation Gateway is connected to the automation platform, this inventory is now available because of federation into the whole inventory of the whole platform itself. So Automation Studio, Configuration Manager, they are aware of these devices and how to reach them. So we have those devices available. What's interesting here is we have an integration with Ansible that allows you to start to work on the module level. And what makes Ansible interesting for network engineers is they have a lot of pre-built modules for all kinds of different network vendors. And so typically you would have to leverage the module in some other script or playbook or something like that. But within our Automation Gateway, we do an integration at the module layer. So you could actually start to use these modules and execute these modules directly if you wanted to from the dashboard on the in the application. So that's really interesting how we've built these integrations, and that's why many of these other Terraform and NetMiko and Nornir, that's why there's organization and hierarchy here, because we want to be able to bring those scripts on board. But then if there's the ability to do a little more tighter integration, that's why these categories exist. But by and far, what we find is that most customers already have some sort of scripts, usually Python, Bash, anything that could run, on a Linux command line. We can support and bring on board into the scripts category. And one of them that I'll show you now is something very simple, iOS show version.py. Obviously, this just does a simple show version on an Cisco iOS device. And so if I load that up, I can take a look at the script. And it's very simple. It expects as an argument the host name. And then it uses a NetMiko library to connect to the device based off of that host name that's given on the command line. And then uses a regular expression match to find the version number and then just outputs. It's very simple, straightforward. However, we can take this script now, and yes, people can look at it on the team from this view and they can execute it from here. But what really becomes interesting is if we decorate this script. So this CLI script on its own is meant to be run from the command line, but using a process of decoration, which means we're defining from an API perspective, what are the required inputs that are needed for this particular script to run through an API. And so we can have very complex and dynamic type parameters here for the decoration. In this case, it's very straightforward. There's only one argument value needed, host name. And so this particular decoration just defines that host name and says it's required and it needs to exist. So when somebody tries to run this script through an API or even through here, so I can cancel here and go to execute, it's going to ask for that host name and require it. So if I give it a host name of CoreATL0, I can preview this and I can see what it's going to pass. And this matches this JSON object, this decoration that we created. And it's going to pass that through the system to the script itself as it runs. So if I run this now, we'll get an output back that says, yes, that was successful. That device is running iOS 15.5, and here's the command line that I entered, and that was all validated through this through that decoration. Now the next step from that is once that decoration is made on any of these assets that are available, they can be used through an external API, and we can test that from within the system. So under Automation Gateway, if I go to the API documentation, I can scroll down to this section on scripts, and then we can test to make sure now that the script that's been onboarded with a decoration can be run from an external source if we chose to publish it. So if I click on try it out, the first thing it's going to ask is, okay, give me the execution parameters that are required. This matches that decoration, that JSON schema that we created. So I'm going to give it the argument of host name, and that's the host name we just ran it as. And then all I need to do is give it the name of the script as it appears, iOS show version.py. Oops. And then if I execute and run the script, it's going to give me a response, and it's going to show me if I were to run this from curl from a command line, this is the format that it's sent over. And then the original URL that it's accessing is this. And then we get the status response. So code 200 of the status response is successful. And of course, we see the same output as when we ran it from within the application a moment ago. And so now this script can be made available and published out. So this is taking this, all of your existing automation scripts, automations, playbooks, being able to put an API on top of them, share them and publish them with your team so that you're going to foster more automation strategies. And then also all of this work now becomes available inside of Automation Studio as drag and drop components, so that you can reuse all of your automations that you've already built, even if they're CLI-based scripted automations. Because we just believe philosophically that all automation is good and we should include it whenever we can. So that was the overview of Automation Gateway. Now let's shift over to take a look at Automation Studio. But before we go to Automation Studio, let's take a quick look at an area called Admin Essentials. So we talked a little bit about how it's important to be able to onboard many systems, many controllers, and then to really get started quickly in building your own automations. We've created a library of pre-built automations that match use cases that are not the most popular use cases that our customers have asked for. And so all of that is available within the Admin Essentials. So being able to onboard an adapter or create your own integration to a system if that adapter is not in our library, so that you can integrate with these systems that are part of your IT ecosystem. And then if I go into the pre-built catalog here, I can see all of the pre-built assets that are available, freely available as Itential open source. And I can quickly search for things like, we're going to do some work on an Arista router. And if I click on this, you'll see that I have lots of documentation. It includes the workflows that you need, in this case, to make changes, configure, and make changes on an Arista EOS VLAN configuration. And everything you need is part of this package that you can download and immediately start working on. And so we are going to use today the Arista VRF configuration just for the sake of time. I've already onboarded it. So, but it's a similar situation where you can just onboard these just like anything else. So that's how to really help get started quickly. Now let's go into the Automation Studio portion. And so from Automation Studio, this is the quick drag and drop way we can bring pre-builts in, we can make modifications, we can start from scratch. Let me take you a quick overview of this. We have the ability to create different types of forms. So forms are what's viewed when you run an automation. So from Automation Catalog, I was able to pop up a form, and I'll show you that in a moment, that allows you to put some guide rails around and validate some of the input that's given to an automation. As part of this pre-built, there are some forms that come with it. We have the ability to do command templates. So command templates are things like the ability to do complex or maybe even simplified CLI commands and parse the output. So if I do an EOS, this is part of the pre-built that we'll be using today. We can run configuration lines, so we can pass those to a particular device. In this case, it's an EOS device, and do checks on these to make sure certain outputs exist. Doing this is kind of like the foundation of a lot of pre-checks. And if we take this concept of command templates and we use them under analytic templates, that now allows us to analyze things. So I take a command template before a change happens, and I look at the output, and then I save that output, and then I take I run the command after a network change happens, and now I have the output of both of them, and we can diff and take a look at them closely as part of a pre-check and a post-check operation, which is critical for building confidence into your automations. And then we have an area called templates. So if you're familiar with any kind of working in a CLI environment, you'll know that a lot of the output, say for instance from a show interface command, is not necessarily organized in a way that's easy to understand. This is actually one of the easier examples. But what templates can do is take a very, the output of a command, of a CLI command, and parse it. We can use text FSM or Jinja 2 templates as part of the template, and then parse it and put it into an output that's machine usable. So we can parse through all the ports looking for a particular status or a VLAN or anything like that. And so being able to manipulate that data as part of the automation is important. So that's what those templates are for. And finally, transformations. We talked about this being a key component to being able to transform data from one API output to another, and doing it without having to write a lot of code to do all kinds of data manipulation. So what we have here are JSON schema transformations, or JSTs, and these are ways in a very drag and drop, point and click way, you can take the output of, say, an API call. So that API is going to return some output, and maybe we get like an IP address or something like that from an IPAM, and it's formatted in a certain way, but we need to reformat it in a way where we can pass it on to the controller so that it can do something with that IP address, and it expects a different format. So instead of writing a lot of code to do that over and over and over again, we can do this through JSTs, these transformations, and create a drag and drop methodology now that's also reusable between these API calls. So these are part of the of some of the pre-builts that we package up together as well, because they work between different systems. Okay, so we've covered all of that. So now let's get to the meat of it. Let's take a look at some automations. So the first automation I want to take a look at is that pre-built of that Arista automation that we had already imported into the system, but that's available in our library. And you can see it's a set of steps, one by one, with some branching based off of the evaluation of whether something was successful or not. The main piece of this, because it is an overview, is to understand that these are pre-builts that do very specific work. So this is a pre-built that's made to do work on a network, on an Arista device, for VRF. So making changes within a VRF, creating and making changes. This exists, and this is usable today in the format that it's in. But what becomes really interesting is if we look at something like what an end-to-end, so this is a kind of more of a, like a, it's an automation for a very particular network task. If we look at something like what an end-to-end framework looks like. So let's take a look at this. This is another automation that modularizes some things. And this is important because in an end-to-end framework, we want to integrate with all kinds of other systems that are part of the process. So if you conceptualize the networking services layer as the last automation that I showed you, which was how do we do work on an Arista VRF, right? And if we put that as saying, hey, that is a very much network services type application. But if you look at an end-to-end, that's not where it starts. An end-to-end process usually starts with some sort of change request, right? Maybe it's ServiceNow or Jira. And so we can create modular frameworks where maybe even another team is responsible for the automations that exist in this box here that allow you to create and open a ticket in ServiceNow and Jira. So for this example, we're using both. We also see that a lot of our customers want some sort of broadcast notification as part of the end-to-end. So in this framework, we're going to broadcast because we have to support many ecosystems. These automations need to. So we're going to broadcast to Slack, Teams, WebEx, and email. Okay, what we can. Next is the actual work that gets done. And this is great because now this becomes where the networking team can truly focus on the part that's theirs and not have to worry about the change request piece, the broadcast notifications. Those are modular and they don't really change as much as the piece that the networking team has to focus on. So this is where they would live. And in this case, why can't we just bring in a pre-built that's already done, like that Arista EOS VRF pre-built? And that's exactly what we're going to do. So coming from there, updating the change request based off of the status of what was done, the work that was done, and then sending a final broadcast notification that says, hey, the work is done. And again, if we were going to turn this from this generalized framework into a end-to-end framework with the Arista VRF automation. So I have just created, all I've done is updated this to be a child job, and that child job includes the automation workflow that came as part of that pre-built to do the creation of the VRF for an Arista device. And that's it. So I haven't changed anything else. All of this stays the same. And now you can kind of see how quickly you can start to build end-to-end automations as a network practitioner. I can get a pre-built, import in the system, create this child job as part of the network services layer, and then we're off. Or and other teams can maintain these other broadcast and change request notification parts as well. But the real focus for the networking team should be the networking piece. And so now working along with these teams, they can all start to work together. And now I can quickly replicate this methodology. I can bring new pre-builts in and start building automation after automation after automation. So now let's go to automation catalog, because remember, that's where when an automation is built, we can publish this automation and make it available with a form to kind of validate that input. And if I take a look at what we have here, I can search for the Arista end-to-end automation. And let's see. First thing I want to do is I'll run it manually, and this will bring up a form. And so this, it's asking me for a device name. It's instantiating devices based off of the federated inventory. We have it defaulted to this EOS. I have a VLAN ID that I need to determine, and I want to pick one that doesn't exist. So if I go back to Configuration Manager and load the configuration up, again, it's accessing that in real time through another controller. In this case, it's an automation gateway. And if I go to the bottom, I can see that the last VRF that was created was 2019. So 2020 is what we'll use. Let's see, automation catalog. Okay, so 2020 here. I'm going to keep the network address and everything else the same. We're going to do the change requests. We're going to leave those alone, and then I'll do an auto approval, which kind of bypasses any kind of manual tasks that we might have as part of this demo. And then I'm going to start. And so now this has kicked off an automation. That automation that I showed you earlier, that's the end-to-end, and it's going to show us every step of the way through the job manager, and it's already done the change requests and the broadcast notification. So if I go to my Slack instance here, I have this set up on our Slack notification, and 141, just now, it kicked off a job. So this is part of that notification framework where we're leveraging both Jira and ServiceNow. So if I click on this ServiceNow link, it should bring up a ticket that it's opened automatically as part of this automation to create a new VRF and this Arista device. And so here we have the state is new. And now if I go back to the job itself, now it's what the process that it's on is the VRF automation. So it's actually running right now, and now it's finished running, and now it's updating the change request. And after that, it's the final broadcast notification. Let me head back to Config Manager and let me update the configuration. So again, it's pulling this in real time, and we should be able to see that it's inputted VLAN 2020 as a VRF with that virtual router address. And then if we go back to Slack, very quickly, very soon it will add the notification of it finishing the entire task. There it is. So now the final notification says it's finished and that job is complete. And so again, this is important to show how quickly that teams can get started in the Automation Studio, leveraging both Configuration Manager and Automation Gateway, and leveraging all of these applications. They can be used independently, but they can be leveraged together to really create automations very, very quickly. And now let me switch back over into the slides, and we will finish off. So to kind of finish off, how quickly we can get you going is we have a lot of pre-built automations already for the top use cases that you could probably imagine, and quite a few that maybe you haven't thought about yet. And of course, being able to create pre-built integrations into all the different systems, or allowing you to do those integrations yourself. This gives you freedom and flexibility to leverage your entire ecosystem and get started quickly in these automations. And then finally, some of those top automation use cases, of course, they span the traditional networking. So software upgrades, VLAN changes, device onboarding, all of these things come up quite a bit. But also think about in terms of cloud networking. Remember what we talked about, golden config and compliance. That needs to be leveraged in the world of cloud networking, because as network engineers and practitioners start to become more responsible for cloud networking, which is more API driven, or cloud network services, building configuration compliance across that is important. So the tool set has to extend into that direction, along with being able to automate across those different services as well. And then finally, kind of this next container of what we call modern networking is things that kind of span across all of these things. So SD-WAN is kind of the first thing that you think of. It's taking a traditional remote branch office networking solution, and now bringing it into the cloud, having a cloud controller, and kind of branching into both directions. Hybrid cloud, similar idea. How do we connect our private data center to the public cloud? What about multi-cloud? All kinds of solutions around transit now become more complex, and then within different clouds, the networking services and infrastructure operate differently, have different APIs. So those are automation use cases that you may or may not be looking at, but definitely keep your eye on them. These are things that are kind of more of the modern networking environment that we live in. Of course, what we just showed you is your network automation never starts at just doing the work. It actually is part of an overall process that's going to involve multiple systems in multiple domains. So ITSM systems, IPAM systems, databases, other kind of ticket request systems, whatever it may be, making sure that we can automate across all of that is critical. And then finally, if you're interested and want to continue this journey and take a look at what Itential can do specifically for your organization, please look at Itential.com. Visit us there at Itential.com/free-trial for a test drive, completely free for 30 days. And with that, I know we're a little over, but I will take some questions just for a few minutes here, and then we will conclude. Are you planning? So one question here is, are you planning deep dives each of your components in the future sessions? Absolutely. We've jam-packed this thing to make sure we could give you your value for your time. And so there's a lot going on here, but yes, each one of these sections could and will be a session on their own. So we will deep dive these. I would also recommend, if you're really interested, those are webinars that will be upcoming, but if you're really interested, take a look at some of our previous work that we've published on our website, videos and whatnot. You will get a much deeper flavor of each one of these as well. You showed scripts in Automation Gateway that are available through an API. Are automations built in Automation Studio available through an API as well? Yes, absolutely they are. If you remember back to our framework, our Itential Platform architecture, one of the key components is making sure things on the platform can be made available through APIs to the northbound externally. So we keep with that. You can run these automations through Automation Catalog inside the platform, but the same way as we can make these automations also available through an API as well, so that we can integrate with other systems. And so that's the key concept. How do we continue integration of automation across the entire IT domain? Focusing, of course, on the networking team. And let's do one more. Do I need to build automations in order to have configuration compliance? No, you do not. All of the features that I showed in configuration compliance are built into the application. And so you can have a very robust configuration compliance for both CLI and API just in the application itself. However, obviously, because all of these things are integrated, especially with our Automation Studio and the ability to build automations for automatic remediation, or to continue some of building automations because you have now a stronger foundation because your network is compliant. That's the whole methodology we want our customers to understand. Like, you can use Config Manager as a starting point, build a network that's totally compliant end to end, and makes it easy to make changes, and then start to accelerate your automation across that because you've built a foundation of confidence. Okay, I know we've gone over. I apologize for that, but I hope for those of you that stayed, you got a lot out of it. And I just want to thank you. And once again, have a great day.